Well, good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to our webinar today. Great to have you on board and really appreciate you attending today's session. I'm excited to be talking today about the modernisation of finance. We're going to delve quite deeply into the accounts payable piece and just how we can leverage accounts payable to improve our organisations. Pleased to welcome Carl Brooks and Philip from ProSpend today. They're going to be taking us through some of the content around modernisation of finance and this topic, and a bit of an exciting demo around the ProSpend solution as well. In terms of our agenda for today's session, really, as I said, going to dive quite deeply in terms of accounts payable piece and some interesting insights around how we're seeing accounts payable frame up within the Australian and New Zealand market. And of course, some insights in terms of the digitisation of payments and specifically around virtual cards and how we can potentially leverage those within our organisations. Of course, we will use the Q&A feature of Zoom, so don't hesitate to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Ask those questions, and at the end, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session. Work through all of those and make sure that we've addressed any questions with a significant amount of time. Without any further ado, let me hand over to Carl. Welcome on board.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to all those who are joining today's webinar. So as Stephen says, we got quite a number of items to go through on the accounts payable side and also the digitisation of payments. So the first question I like to ask myself is there innovation happening in the accounts payable space? So this slide here gives us indication that 25% of people see that there's exceptional value in accounts payable, and another 39% see there's a lot of valuable assets to improving accounts payable. And obviously there's some that are lagging behind in terms of improving the accounts payable function. So now that we know that there is a focus on improving accounts payable, what are the hurdles that people, finance leaders, are facing in terms of their accounts payable? So as you can see, some of these hurdles that we've got on the screen here are all about inefficient processes. So having high invoice processing costs, so this is obviously manual data in actually putting that information into your ERP system, then obviously taking that information and getting it through to the right people for approving. And consequences of this is, these inefficiencies is you're having frustrated suppliers through late payments. And then also there's a lot of lack of visibility into where you actually are with your accounts payable. So with those hurdles in mind, how do we solve those problems? Well, before we go sorting those problems, let's just take a look at a snapshot of information that we've received from the Australian government. So in Australia, over 1.2 billion invoices are exchanged annually, and these invoices are B2B invoices and B2G invoices, business to government. So there's we have excluded the business to consumer invoices from this number. And as you can see, 89% of those invoices by small and medium enterprises are actually processed manually. So what this does is it causes a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of unproductive work in the Australian economy. And that's why the ATO are really focused on improving accounts payable and doing a lot of work in terms of the education of automating the accounts payable landscape. So some of these consequences that the ATO have picked up on by doing AP manually is that Australian businesses are actually paid an average of 9 days late. So that really sums up that Australian small businesses are actually owed 26 billion of unpaid invoices at any point in time. And that puts a lot of pressure onto small businesses, and also small businesses can actually, lose out on specific opportunities to use that money in a more productive way by not having it in their own bank account. Now, reasons why some of these invoices are late in payment is due to incorrect information. So that incorrect information might not be actually on the AP invoice itself, but just how that invoice is actually manually entered into the system. And then obviously some of those late payments are actually being sent to the wrong person. So rather than sending to the accounts team, it's actually sent to an individual, and it's sat in the inbox waiting for them to pass it on to the correct person in the finance team. Another concern that the Australian government have, or the ATO have, is around about the payment redirection scams. The ACCC reported in 2022 that actually 224 million was scammed out to small businesses. I actually think that number is a lot higher because not everybody is going to be reporting those to the ACCC, but that's what we have on file as being actual redirection scams that we know about. So with that in mind, we know what hurdles we've got. We know that people are putting a focus on improving their AP. So some of the priorities that businesses are looking for from improving AP, I think the top one is the key one. By not having the data in the system fast and having that data in accurately through manual data entry, we can obviously see a significant improving in reporting and data analytics on the accounts payable. So having that information in the system and having access to that information allows you to make those better business decisions. Also, improving the automation is key to this. And obviously, by improving the automation, you're driving that reporting and data analytics improvement. And then finally, just reducing the processing costs. So obviously, the Australian government have highlighted that they want businesses to be more productive. They're investing a lot in telling businesses about how they can automate their accounts payable. And all of that is to do with making Australian businesses more productive. Now, the thing that we always hear is obviously when you talk about automating processes, people feel that they're going to be automated out of a job, but that's not actually the case. So if you are automating your accounts payable, the skills that you're going to need are going to be a little different to what you're currently doing. So there's going to be a lot more focus on having a customer service mentality with your suppliers, and that helps you build those supplier relationships and might help be able to manage those suppliers better, so you get a better working relationship with those suppliers, which obviously has a better impact on your business. So when customers come to ProSpend or financial leaders come to ProSpend, they've got a number of headaches that they're trying to solve. And some of these things are screaming at them and some of these things are in the background. But this is just really a cloud map of some of the challenges that finance leaders are facing with their accounts payable and their expenses. And this is how we are helping them out with our platform. So what benefits does AP automation bring? Well, firstly, you're not actually manually entering data. So we basically scan and capture the AP bills. And by doing this, you're removing the likelihood of incorrect information going into the system. And we've seen on the previous slide that over 20% of invoices that cause late payments is due to incorrect information. The other benefit that we bring is by getting that data into the system quickly, we've got the ability to automate the approval workflows. So once we capture those AP bills, we're sending it to the right people in the organization for approval. And these approval workflows can go through a number of different levels. So maybe, depending on the AP bill, it might need to go to a project manager because it's of a certain value. It might need to go to the CFO. And again, if it's of a certain value, it might then have to go to the CEO for them to finally approve it. Now, if those people are not approving the AP, you've got alerts in the system to remind those people to say, look, you've got these AP bills that need to be approved. So again, this is all about improving those supplier relationships by getting that information into the system, getting it to the right people, reminding them that they need to approve it, and allowing you to have those approved ready for when the due date for the supplier needs to be paid. The other benefit that we offer is the statement reconciliation. So again, in that slide I mentioned earlier, about 20% of AP is being sent to the wrong person. So if you get your statement, you can then check that to see if you've got all the correct AP in the system. And if not, you can speak to the supplier to find out, to get a copy of that AP document. And then finally, the payment notification to the suppliers, and we'll talk more about that later. The other benefit that we bring is fraud control. So there's a number of things we do in helping with controlling fraud. First one is we've got a secure email vault that you could have your emails sent to. So rather than send to accounts@domainname.com.au, you can actually send it to the ProSpend email vault. So no removing phishing scams there. Once the email is received, we will do a check within the ERP system to make sure that supplier exists, and if not, we then have a workflow to manage that exception. And if that supplier is generally a supplier that is genuine to the business, but we've just not entered it into the accounts payable system, obviously we've got the process of telling the finance team that that supplier is missing so that they can enter it into the ERP system. Once in the ERP system, we do the bank account validation. So we check on BSB and account number to make sure all of that is correct. We also do a check to make sure we're not paying the invoice twice. And then we'll also do an alert on if the invoice dollar amount is quite different to the normal trends that we get from that supplier. And this is really just a flag so that you can have another set of eyes just to make sure that the AP document is true to what it should be. And finally, we've got the two-way and three-way matching, so that actually will speed up and let you know if that document is good to pay or not. So unfortunately, Phil can't show the fraud control in his demo site. It's not been upgraded to our latest release. But here is the screens that you see. So we have a specific tab on the AP invoice that's all around fraud. And this one basically goes through all of those checks that I talked about earlier. And in this example, you can see there's a red flag on the account number. And bringing that up, it then tells you, this is the scan details that we've got picked up from the AP invoice versus what we have on file from the ERP system. And this basically identifies if that is a fraudulent invoice or not. So on that note, I just want to go through what the manual AP transactional flow looks like in either MYOB, EXO, or Advanced. So basically, you get your AP invoiced, you enter the data in manually, you get the data approved, you then do the create the payment batch. That produces your ABA file that you download. You then send the remittance out of MYOB, EXO, or Advanced, and then you have to go into your online banking and upload that ABA file. Talking about semi-automated AP transactional flow, well, we've got the OCR capturing, which is basically the AP automation. We then push that through to MYOB, EXO, or Advanced, and therefore you then follow the same steps again, creating the payment, downloading the ABA file, sending the remittance, and uploading that ABA file to the bank. And later in this presentation, we'll talk about how we are going to be digitizing this payments and what the workflow will then look like once we've got that product's features added to the ProSpend platform. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. I'm going to put myself on mute and hand over to my colleague Phil to take you through a demo of the product, and I'll be back after that demo.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Carl. What I'll do, I'm just going to share my screen. As Carl mentioned, I'll be taking you through a practical demonstration of the platform today. We'll really be focusing the bulk of the time on the accounts payable automation piece on the session this morning. We won't go into the staff expenses. Obviously, it is a part of the platform, so all the modules are all held in one place. But if you did want to learn more about the expense module, like staff with out-of-pocket expenses, any company credit cards or virtual cards as well, certainly just reach out to your Kilimanjaro account manager and they can organize a separate session with you to run that through. What I'll do though, we'll jump across into the ProSpend platform. ProSpend itself is entirely cloud-based. There's nothing that you need to download or install on a local PC or on your network server. A user would just jump onto prospend.com and sign straight in from there. What we'll do to kick things off as well, we'll jump in as an AP officer first. So we'll jump in as an accounts payable manager, in this case, Kylie. So someone who actually receives the accounts payable invoices from the suppliers, and I'll show you what they look like within the platform. Straight away, as an AP officer, this would be my home screen. So by default, I can see any invoices that have been received from suppliers haven't yet been coded or pushed through the approval workflow just yet. So I've jumped in here as Kylie. Straight away, I can see I've got 3 tax invoices currently sitting here that need my attention. The way they've been received in the platform is simply by email. So most of our clients would have an email address running, like invoices or accounts at yourcompany.com. Suppliers would just email their bills straight to that address. And as they do that, ProSpend will then create those tax invoices here in the platform and scan and extract all the data here as well. So I've done nothing with these apart from just email them through prior to the session this morning. I can see on my screen, I've got these 3 tax invoices sitting here. I can see the supplier's details, the supplier's invoice number, the date of the bill, and the value. And from here, as an accounts payable officer, I can then just click straight through on each of those invoices. Straight away, I've got a copy of that tax invoice on the left and all those details on the right. Again, all that information there was scanned automatically from the tax invoice. So it's come in, it's been mapped to that supplier card, in this case FedEx, and that is coming directly through from your MYB database. If this is from a brand new supplier who don't yet exist in MYB, it would flag at this point, let you know they need to be set up in MYB before it can be processed within the platform. The supplier's ABN and the invoice number is scanned and checked here as well. Likewise, we do that duplicate detection as well based on those fields. So if the same invoice comes through a second time, we would flag it at this point, let you know that invoice has already been processed, and give you a link back to that first invoice here as well. As Carl mentioned in the slide deck, we also scan the bank information automatically from the supplier's invoice. So the BSB and the account number is also extracted. Again, we compare that to what's on file in the supply card. And if that doesn't match, again, we'll flag it. We'll let you know there's been a mismatch on the details there. We would then encourage you to contact the supplier outside the platform, verify that's a legitimate change. Obviously, if it is, update the details in MYB, it will then allow to process that bill. But if that was a fraudulent invoice, that would simply be cancelled and it would go no further. The date of the accounts payable is scanned and extracted. Likewise, we can scan or extract the due date from the invoice here as well. I've got that turned off for the webinar this morning, but there's 2 ways that could have been configured. That could have been scanned from the invoice itself. So if the due date is available on the bill, we can scan and extract that for you. Or we can also use the payment terms that you have set up in MYB. So if you had an invoice come through and you had a 30-day account with that supplier, we can instead do that calculation for you as they're receipted. Now, for this invoice here, I'm processing this one as a straight accounts payable invoice. So it's going to go straight through the platform without a purchase order attached, but I do have an example of a bill with a purchase order that we'll jump into in a moment, so we can ignore that one there. If we jump down, I can then do some coding on that AP bill, which has come through from the chart of accounts. You can build rules around this coding as well. So I've built a rule on my site here today, and I've simply said any bills that come in from that supplier FedEx are automatically coded to the entity, Jim's instruction, the cost center finance, and the GL account postage in that example there. If it doesn't match that default rule for whatever reason, we can always reallocate that through to a different entity, different cost center or department. I can also tag that through to a project code here as well at this point. And I can see the quantities, unit prices, amounts, and GST have all been scanned automatically from that bill. So all that data entry has been eliminated for the AP manager. Finance can also choose to split an invoice as well. So you might receive the one invoice from a supplier, but that might relate to multiple entities, different cost centers, projects, or GLs. So we can also click through on that invoice and then split that transaction. We can split this invoice as many ways as required. So as an example here, we might split that bill 3 ways. Again, I can code that through to different entities and cost centers, different GL accounts, different project codes here as well. We could just split that invoice equally. So I might just allocate 3 equal portions to each of those accounts. I could split that by dollar value. I could nominate a particular percentage on each line item here as well. I can have some lines being having GST and others being GST free. If you run the same split regularly though, you can also save or build a template of splits as well. So as an example, if you have something like your Telstra invoice or rent, and that's split across the same 28 cost centers every month, you could simply save that as a split and just run that as those invoices arrive. They can then go through a very complex approval workflow. So each department head might approve their portion. They might just get an alert email to let them know a particular portion of the bill has been allocated to their P&L. But in terms of approvals and structure, that is really up to you as a business. In terms of the platform, it can really be as simple or complex as you like. On my demo site today, I've just kept things very flat and simple. So I've simply built it by supplier. So I've said any invoices that come through from the supplier FedEx are automatically approved by the manager, John Red, regardless of the dollar value. But it can be much more complex than that as well. So it could be based on the coding of the line items. So it could be based on the entity, the cost center, or the projects that you've allocated there. It could be based on the dollar value of the invoice as well, or a combination of any of those rules as well. So you might say if an invoice comes through for marketing for less than, say, $2,000, that's approved by the marketing manager and it then goes into MYB for payment. If the bill is between, say, 2 and 5,000, it might go to the marketing manager first to check off, and a second manager might be involved in that process. If the invoice was for more than, say, 20K, that might then also need to go through to a director for approval before payment. So in terms of approvals, it can really be as simple or complex as you like, but for the session this morning, we're keeping it very simple. That will then go straight across to the approver, John Red, to review and approve. I'm just going to jump into a couple of other invoice examples here as well. I've got another AP bill here, which again is just a straight invoice. There's no purchase order attached to that one, but it's come through from Direct Couriers. Again, copy of the bill on the left, details on the right. Again, I can see all that header level information has been extracted, so the supply card information, the ABN, invoice number, and bank information. But if I jump down, this has actually been set up as a line item scan. This is optional. You can turn it on and off by a supplier. So for some of our clients, there might be some suppliers where this might be quite useful to have this automatic breakdown. For others, you might just want a header level scan set up there instead. So in this example, each of those line items, the quantities, unit prices, amounts, and GST have instead been extracted at a line level, and it's essentially mirrored the information the supplier had included on the invoice. We can also click through and collect additional information there as well. So on my site today, I've also then asked the system to extract for me the quantities and the item codes here as well. From here again, we can reallocate the coding at a line level. We can also split any transactions here as well. But from here, if we're happy with that invoice, that can now just go straight through the approval workflow. And again, I've just set that to be approved by that manager, John Red. I just want to jump into that last example here, and it's an example of a two-way matching invoice. So I can see, again, copy of the invoice on the left, all those details on the right. So it's come in from that supplier Nakama. Again, the ABN, invoice, and the bank information was extracted. But in this case, I've actually matched it to a purchase order. In terms of purchase orders as well, there's quite a number of options in terms of workflows of how you want the PO module to operate. We have quite a number of clients who use the PO module within ProSpend itself. So you can raise a purchase order within the ProSpend platform. It can again go through an approval workflow and out to a supplier. We can also then write that into MYB as well. But we also cater for the reverse scenario. So if you already have purchase orders running in your organization and you're already raising those POs within MYB Advanced or EXO, we can instead pull the purchase order into the platform to allow the invoice and purchase order to be matched together. We can also take it that next step further. So we can also enable three-way matching. I don't have it configured for the session today. Reason being, there's so many variables when it comes to three-way matching, so many clients process it in very different ways. But if your organization is running three-way matching, so having an invoice, purchase order, but you're also doing goods receipting, certainly reach out and we can jump into a more in-depth demo to show you the options there. When you go down the path of three-way matching, it then totally opens up a new world of approvals on the accounts payable invoices. You can then build rules and say if an invoice comes through, it's equal to or less than the PO value, plus someone in the warehouse has receipted it, and they all match, that can just go straight across into MYB. If an invoice comes through, though, for more than the PO value or for a different value to what's been receipted by the staff in the warehouse, that can then go through a variation process for someone to approve the difference in the spend there. On this bill, though, I've matched that to a purchase order. So there's no receipting on this one, but it's being matched to a purchase order. The system will match the invoice and PO together for you automatically as well. So if the supplier references the PO number, either from ProSpend or MYB, we can match the invoice and PO together for you here automatically. By doing so, all the coding that the user would have entered on that purchase order will be applied. So I can see on this site, on this example here, this didn't come through from a rule I built by supplier. It actually came through from the purchase order itself. So I can see the entity, cost center, the expense type and project has all come through. Likewise, the memo the user would have entered on that purchase order has been copied across. The quantities, unit prices, amounts, and GST, though, were all scanned automatically from that tax invoice. On that purchase order as well, I can click through on that tab and I can see that PO was raised for $176, but this invoice has come through for only $82.50. So I've got a balance here of $93.50 remaining. I can also see the user ordered 2 items, but only one's been invoiced or receipted. So from here, we could choose to keep that purchase order open. So it might be that we're paying a deposit today, the supplier's only partially fulfilled the order. So we could keep that PO open and then have multiple invoices simply coming through and drawing down that purchase order amount. We could instead, though, if the supplier couldn't fulfill the rest of the order, we can also choose to close that purchase order, and that would then forfeit that remaining $93.50 and close that purchase order off. Again, you've got a few options here as well in terms of approval workflows. Obviously, different clients operate in different ways when it comes to invoice approvals. On my site here today, though, I've actually built a rule and said if the invoice comes through for equal to or less than the purchase order value, that can now go straight through into MYB. So that'll actually bypass that approval step. What I'll do from here, though, I do want to jump in as a manager and I want to take you through what that approval workflow will look like on the other 2 invoices where I didn't have a purchase order linked there. So what I'll do, I'm going to jump in as that manager, John Red. Just as a side note as well, the approvers can work from either the desktop site or the app on the phone. There's absolutely no limitation based on where they choose to work from. But I'm just going to jump onto the desktop site for the webinar today. Straight away, I can see as an approver up the top, here are those 2 invoices that I've been working on the session this morning. I can see they've both come through from Kylie in the finance team. The supplier's details, the invoice number, the dates of those bills, and the amounts are here as well. From here as an approver, I can then click through on any claim type. So I can then jump into that invoice from FedEx. Straight away, I've got a copy of that bill on the left, all those details on the right. I can see there's that one line item, but it's been split 3 ways. From here, I can then click through, view that split allocation here as well, making sure everything looks legitimate and we're happy with that coding. If we're not happy with that coding, though, for any reason, we can simply reject that back to the finance team with some notes, ready for them to sign in, make some changes, or simply comment back and resubmit. You can also give the approver access to make changes to those invoices as well. So again, different companies operate in different ways. We've got some clients where the finance team do all the coding up front. The managers are simply reviewing and approving. We've got other clients where it might be the manager or the approver who actually does the allocation to the project or the job. They might reallocate the departments or even build these splits as well. So it's up to you really with what you give access to the approvers to do. From here, though, if I'm happy with that bill, that all looks correct and good to go, I could simply approve it from here. From here, that would then go through to the next approver. So if you had a multi-level or sequential workflow running on your site, that would then work through that process. Or from here, I'm the last or the only approver in this workflow that I'm working on here today. So that will then be sent across to the finance team to do a final check, or again, it could be posted into MYB Advanced directly. From here, I'm just going to jump into that last invoice from the session today. So again, here's that bill that came through from direct couriers. Again, I can check over all that header level information. I can jump down, checking over those line items here as well. Again, if we're not happy with something, you can give the approver access to click through, make any changes here as well. This approver has that access. So from here, I could then relocate that through to a different cost center, tag it through to a different GL account here as well, or apply project. I could also click through further and do a split on that line item if need be. Any changes that are made throughout the entire platform are all shown in the order history. So you can see exactly who's made what changes and the dates and times any of those changes are made as well. But from here, if we're happy with that bill, it's simply a matter of approving that one from here. Now, on my demo site today, I've got what's called like a final approval step enabled. So the invoice came through at the beginning, it came through to an accounts clerk, it went across to a line manager, but it's then being checked by another person in the finance team before it hits MIB. This is optional. Some client, like the majority of our clients do have this enabled, but it's not mandatory. You can instead just have it being written across into MIB as the managers review and approve those invoices. From here, though, they're going through that final check, and I've got a quick summary here as accounts. This is essentially almost like a to-do list. So it's displaying for you all the invoices that have been reviewed and approved by the managers, haven't yet been checked by the finance team or sent across into MIB, but you've got full visibility throughout the entire platform as well. So I've also got a dashboard that's available here as well. You might instead choose to set this as your home screen, but that will then display for you a quick visual summary of where all the claims are at any point in time. I'm working from a demo site here today, so I don't have a lot of data here to show, but I think you should still get the right idea. But I've got a quick snapshot per module. So I've got a quick snapshot there of the expense module. I can see at a snapshot any claims that haven't yet been submitted. So I've got 6 out-of-pocket staff expenses on my site here today, 13 corporate cards that haven't yet been submitted, but I can also track things that are pending approval, approved and sent into MIB. I can see things that are coming up due for payment. You'd also be able to see on average how long is it taking staff to submit their expenses, how long is it taking managers to approve, and how many lines are missing receipts. If we jump down to the invoice tab though, again, I can see on my demo site today, I've got quite a number of invoices that haven't yet been submitted, what's pending approval with managers, what's been approved and sent into MIB. Likewise, if you had that due date functionality enabled, you'd also be able to forecast. So from here, I can then see of all the invoices in ProSpend, how many are already overdue for payment? How many are due for payment in the next 7, 14, 28 days? How many new suppliers do we have coming on board? And likewise, if you choose to link purchase orders here, we can then also get that purchase order status as well. So at a snapshot, I can see how many purchase orders have been approved, but no invoices yet receipted, how many have been linked, and what the variance is on that as well. So on average on my site today, I can see how many invoices are coming through for equal to, less than, or more than the purchase order value. All the dashboards are interactive as well. So from this screen, I can see I've got 25 invoices pending approval with managers on this demo site today. I can then click through. I've got a quick snapshot of how many invoices are sitting with which managers. I can then click through, checking over those invoice detail lines, checking over through that allocation, the dollar values. If you had that due date, that would also then show for you the due date information here as well. You could then even click through further. So from here, I can then click through on that invoice to view the bill with the full details. If we jump back to that previous screen, so if I jump back to that to-do list, I can see here are those 3 invoices that I've been working on in the session today. I can see they were all coded by Kyle and the finance team. I've then got a quick snapshot of the suppliers details, the invoice number, the amount to be paid on each of those, along with the allocation, invoice details, any due date information here as well, along with who approved those and the dates and times that they were reviewed and approved. From here as accounts, I've got the option to click through. So as a finance manager, it could have been the CFO who gets involved in this process. I might see an invoice that's come through. It's an unusual supplier. It's a high value invoice, and I want to click through and view the full details. I've got the option to do that still at this point. Straight away, I can see everything as it was displayed earlier. Copy of the bill on the left, all those details are on the right. From here, I can simply check all that off, making sure we're happy. If we're not happy with something, though, for any reason, I've got a couple of workflow options here as well. I can reject or dispute that with the AP clerk initially. I've also got the option to dispute that with the approver as well. So we've got a couple of options there in terms of dispute resolution. You can also allow changes directly at this point prior to it being sent into MIB. So if you notice something last minute, we've claimed GSO we shouldn't have, it's gone through to the wrong cost center or GL account, we've still got the option to make those changes here as well. From here, though, if we're happy with those invoices, they all look correct and good to go, it's simply a matter of finalizing those straight from here. They are then locked down in ProSpend, no more changes can be made, and they are then automatically sent through to MIB. So for both MIB Advanced and EXO, we've got a direct API integration already existing. So there's no need to export a flat file or rekey the data. Everything is connected direct, and it's all live and instant. So from here, what we'll do, I'm going to jump across into MYB Advanced for the session today. For those of you on EXO, obviously it is certainly compatible. I'm just not going to be running it through for the sake of timing. But if you did want to learn more about the integration with EXO, certainly reach out to your Kilimanjaro account manager and they can take you through the more details. From here, what we'll do, we'll jump across into MYB Advanced. We'll actually jump across into the invoice I was working on today. So I can see here's a bill that's come in from that supplier Nakama. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit to make it a bit easier for everyone on the webinar. And I can see straight away, here's that bill that I was working on in the session today. So a draft accounts payable invoice has been created across in MYB Advanced. It's been mapped to that supplier in Nakama, and all the details that were collected back in ProSpend have come through here as well. So I can see that just had the one line item. Obviously, if there was multiple lines, they would all be posted here as well. I can see the branch, the account, and the sub-account selected has all come through. The amounts and GST, the date of the transaction of the invoice. The description has come through here as well, and that can also be customized. So I just had the description being PPE for staff training, but often clients would probably have their the date and time it was approved and by who, plus a description, but you can combine any of the fields within ProSpend. Any projects or tasks will be mapped here as well. If we jump up the top, I can see the date of the invoice, the posting period, and the supplier's invoice number has all come through here as well. There is a document link as well. For most of you, that probably wouldn't be exposed at the moment, but once we start writing information there, that would then show. And that is a hyperlink within MYB Advanced, which you can click on, and that will then take me straight back to ProSpend to view the invoice and the full details here in one click. A copy of the PDF invoice itself is also attached in MYB automatically under the files area. So a copy of the invoice is available in both places. You also have the option to archive or export those PDF invoices as well. So we've got some clients where they just have a bit more comfort having a copy of those bills stored on their own server. So you can also export a zip file with all those invoice details there. I'm just going to jump into a second invoice. I just want to show you the invoice that came through from Direct Couriers before I pass back over to Carl, just to show you the multiple lines coming through here as well. So from what I can see, here was that bill that came through from Direct Couriers. Every one of those line items would come across into MYB. From here, you could then release those invoices, move them forward for payment exactly as you do at the moment. So nothing would change in the way those invoices are actually paid. Ultimately, what we're doing is automating that data entry and scanning, bringing that approval workflow online, and then automating the handoff and the storage of the invoices as well. So what I'll do, I might leave it there from the demonstration point of view. I'll pass back over to Carl. I think you've got a few more slides that you wanted to run through. Like I mentioned as well, like if you did want to have a bit more of an in-depth discussion around your accounts payable process, feel free to reach out to your account manager and they can organize a session to run it through in more detail. So over to you, Carl.
Perfect, Phil. Thank you for that demo. I mean, but that demo touched on a number of those hurdles we talked about, getting that data in, having that analytical information, better reporting of where the information is, and having those checks and balances to make sure that the information is correct. And then obviously having that full approval and any change is made to any of the transactions, having that full audit history so that you've obviously got an understanding of why things have happened in the system. So I just want to go through now the benefits of digital payments, and this is something where ProSpend is, well, we are ProSpend are really excited about in where we're going with the platform. So if we talked about the manual process for AP and we talked about the semi-automated process for AP, this is where we envisage our platform going in the future. So with ProSpend, we're going to be going end-to-end straight through to MYOB, EXO, or Advanced. So we're going to be capturing the AP bills. We're going to be doing the fraud checks. We're going to do the three-way, two-way matching. We've got the statement reconciliation that's coming out next quarter. And at the end of the year, we've got the ability to pay supplier, send the remittance advice, and write the journal entries. So doing all of the AP end-to-end in the one system. So removing the need of doing ABA files, which obviously is another door opening to potential fraud in the business, and having that efficient process from beginning to end. So with ProSpend, you can be your own bank. We've partnered with a company called Wise, and we've rolled out the virtual cards to our customers. And we will be looking at doing supplier payments. With Wise, we're just working out if we've got the best partner to work with. So we're doing some conversations with other partners. And obviously the reason why we're doing that is we just want the best outcomes for our customers. So basically with ProSpend, you can be your own bank. So we've got a treasury function. There is a KYB process to go through, a bit like opening any kind of business bank account. So going through that process, and then once you've been approved, you basically have this treasury function within ProSpend. And this treasury function, you will transfer money from your bank into ProSpend. And with the virtual cards, how this works is you issue the virtual cards, and we've got some examples on the screen here of kind of the virtual cards that we've got. So rather than having a corporate card or a bank account card or using your own personal card, you can issue a ProSpend virtual card out. So we've got the CEO that's got the regular monthly spend of about $5,000 per month. We've got petty cash in the business. So rather than having cash in the business, you can have your own virtual card for petty cash. And also eliminating card sharing, which is a really bad practice in the business. And then obviously if there's a one-time purchase that you need to make, you can actually issue a temporary card for that one-time purchase, and we'll have supplier payments later. But let's talk about the benefits that virtual cards bring to businesses. The nice thing about virtual cards is you're not dealing with a third party. So those cards can be issued and blocked immediately. So there's no wait times. There's no waiting for a card to come through into the post. So if you bring on a new employee and you want to give them a physical card, you then have to apply to the bank, and then the bank will send it. And that employee may have to do some expenses in the business. So they'll, having to use your own personal card while you're waiting for that corporate credit card to be issued is probably not the greatest of onboarding experiences for that employee. So being able to issue a virtual card immediately and not having to wait is an advantage. I mentioned there's temporary cards that you can issue for one-off purchases, or you can have them for everyday usage. Same with credit cards, they've got an expiry date at the end of it. The nice thing about virtual cards is it's backed by our expense management solution. So as you're spending, you're basically writing your own expense report, and then you just need to match up the receipts and code them as appropriate. By issuing virtual cards, you can remove the cash reimbursements. So obviously removing employee friction, having employees spend their own personal money on behalf of the business. In this day and age with the cost of living is probably not the wisest thing to do. So having virtual cards as an alternative to that is a good way. And virtual cards will come with a lot of spend control around them. So we've got transactional limits, daily limits, weekly limits, monthly limits, lifetime limits. We also have the ability to code which merchant category codes that they can be spent at. So you've really got the capability of locking down how those cards are being used by the people that you've issued them to. You've got improved spend visibility because as soon as the transaction has happened, you're seeing that come through into ProSpend. So with cash reimbursements, you have to wait for the end user to submit them, whereas with virtual cards, you instantly know what your cash position is. They're safer than physical cards. I mentioned you can eliminate credit card sharing. They're coming at a lower cost, and it's all backed by multi-factor authentication. So they're perfectly safe to use. So a bit about ProSpend before we go into the Q&A. So we are a business spend management platform. We've covered off today accounts payable. I've talked about the expenses and the virtual cards and the payments function. We also do a lot more. So obviously, if you are interested, like Phil said, we're happy to do one-on-one demos with you. Speak to your account manager at Kilimanjaro, and they can organize that for you. And obviously, we can tailor a demonstration to what you need to see and what you want to see out of the platform. So we're very, very proud to hit the 1,000 customer mark. So we've got 1,000 customers on the platform. And here's some of the logos that we have. Our sweet spot is businesses that are turning from 10 million to 100 million. We do have businesses below that. We do have businesses above that. But As an 80-20 rule, 80% of our businesses fall into that 10 million to 100 million revenue category. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to you, Stephen, for Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carl. Good session there. Philip, great demo. Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Steve.
we've got
Now it's hot seat time.
It is hot seat time, absolutely. It feels like a game show almost. So I'm going to put both of you guys on the spot here. Got a good number of questions actually that we're going to talk through. First one, Phil, for you, is the approval process within MYB EXO or MYB Advanced?
Yeah, look, it's totally up to the client ultimately. I think the majority of our clients, I'd probably say 90% would run the approval process through ProSpend itself. But certainly doesn't mean that that's the way you have to run it. It ultimately comes down to the way you process transactions at the moment. So we've got some clients where it might only be the finance team or admin who actually have a login or a license to MYB, in which case it would most likely use the ProSpend system. It just means that for the managers, it's the one place they need to work from to manage obviously staff expenses and the accounts payable invoices. But if you've got staff who are already using MYB Advanced or EXO to raise purchase orders, they're doing good receipting there already, you could certainly use the approval functionality there as well. And I suppose it's in reverse. It's then just the finance, the admin team who are working from ProSpend. So it's completely up to the client.
Very good. Fantastic. Thank you, Phil. Next question. How does this work for recurring general ledger and AP transactions?
For me as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can build rules for recurring invoices. So for things like, power, water, rent, utilities, often they're coded the same way each month. So you can either build the rules like I showed in the session today by supplier. You can also use that split functionality. So if it's a more complex invoice, like if your rent invoice is split across 10 departments, you can instead build a split. That split will then save the allocation that you usually do based on percentage. So if the invoice goes up and down, it will still split it based on the allocation.
Fantastic. Now, while we're talking about splits, Phil, can we split line expenses into project task, and cost code levels?
Absolutely. So essentially any of the dimensions that you've got configured in the platform are available in that split area. For the session today, I was running, obviously I was connected to MYB Advanced, so I had the option there to split it between branches, sub-accounts, GLs, and projects. I wasn't running tasks on the demo today, but if you did have tasks available, that's also available in the split function as well.
Fantastic. Now, can invoices have attachments within ProSpend? And if so, what restrictions might exist in terms of the number of attachments or the size of attachments that relate to a single invoice, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the platform itself, I didn't jump into it in the demonstration, but there is a supporting documents area there. So against a tax invoice, you can upload supporting docs, and that can really be anything you like. There's no limit on the number of attachments you can upload there, likewise the size or the format. So common use cases for that might be you've received an invoice, but the goods arrived damaged. So it might be photos of damage. It might be emails of you going back and forward with the supplier, organizing a credit note, or they've approved for you to short pay the invoice. It can really be anything that supports that invoice that you want to collate against there.
Now, a little bit of a related question. Is there a manual way to upload the invoice into the ProSpend vault rather than having it emailed direct from the supplier?
For accounts payable invoices, no, they're always received via that email address. The benefit of that is, though, if you receive the invoice through to your own personal work email, it's just a matter of forwarding that email through. Likewise, we didn't really talk about paper invoices, but if you still receive manual invoice in the post, again, it's just a matter of scanning and email it through to that address. Obviously, on the expense management module, so for staff out-of-pocket expense and corporate cards, you've got a few other options there. Obviously, they can use the app on the phone to capture receipts on the go. They can upload or email. But on the accounts payable module, it's purely via email.
So just emphasizing that for the person who had to leave their desk, absolutely, generally supplier invoices are emailed through a generic mailbox, so accounts.payable@domain.com.au, or you can scan them yourselves, forward them to that mailbox, and they can get processed from there. Additional documentation can be attached as well within the ProSpend interface. All right. want to keep going here, Phil. Got a few more for you. If there's no GST on the invoice, does ProSpend automatically recognize this?
It does. I probably should have highlighted that a bit more in the session, but that invoice that I had there from FedEx actually had no GST on the invoice, and the system was smart enough to then automatically remove that as well. So it's the exact amount of GST on the bill is exactly what's extracted. Likewise, a common example is if you had, say, a Woolworths online account where you get Coles delivered, you might then have things like, bread, milk, and stationery all on that one invoice. So if the GST is not a flat 10%, it's 8.2, whatever it is. It's whatever is on the invoice is exactly what's going to be extracted there. That can then be sent across into MYB as 2 line items. So one line having GST, one being GST free.
Fantastic. Now, Phil, can you explain a bit more around the process of the supplier bank detail validation?
Absolutely. So as the invoices are scanned and extracted, we also scan the BSB&E account number automatically from the supplier's invoice. Once we do that, we then compare that to the supply card. So we will then compare the BSB&E account number against the supply card from MYB Advance or EXO. If there's a mismatch there, so if we scan a different BSB account number to what you have on file in the ERP, we would then flag it, there's been a mismatch there. We would then encourage you to then contact the supplier, verify that's a legitimate change before updating it in MYB and pushing it through.
Fantastic. Now, do you have many New Zealand clients using your software, or is it mainly Australian businesses?
No, we certainly do. It's like the bulk of our clients are across Australia and New Zealand, in saying that we've got clients spread right around the globe. But the majority of our clients are spread across Australia and New Zealand. So we've got a few hundred clients over there on the other side of the Tasman.
Perfect. Now, speaking of different geographies, one of those attending on the call has a number of overseas creditors who charge in US dollars. A purchase order can change over the period for them due to stock availability. And so there's the final invoice there might be changes around the purchase order process coming into receiving, coming into the final invoice being received into ProSpend. How does that work in terms of that potential variation process?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variance on this in terms of FX invoice and overseas supplies. It's probably worthwhile having a chat about this one offline, but it comes down to if you're registered in that country or not. So as an example, you might be a business within Australia, you receive an invoice from the US. That obviously then changes if you're able to obviously claim the tax, if you have a US bank account to pay out of, or if you'll be converting that back over to AUD. So there's a few variances there. The short answer is yes, we can handle it. It just depends on what scenario works for you. So whether we'll be scanning that as a US invoice into a US currency in the system and then paying out of US if you have a US bank account, or if we're scanning it as a US invoice, converting it to AUD because you're registered and only paying out of AU. So it comes down to the currencies that you hold as well.
Now, of course, that whole issue around three-way matching, how you're managing your goods receiving process, how you're managing those currencies with the different options that you talked about there, Phil, it does get fairly detailed. So if you do have some questions around the three-way matching, around the good receiving process, or specifically around handling of multi-currencies within that environment, just reach out and we can talk through in more detail outside of this session. Now, I've got another one for you here, Phil. And don't worry, Cal, there's some coming for you shortly, so just hold on. Question here, is the system suited for remote work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big benefit of the ProSpend platform is that it's entirely cloud-based. So there's nothing that your IT team need to install on the user's desktop or on your server. A user would just jump straight into prospend.com and obviously jump in and review and approve invoices, do the coding straight from there. There's also the mobile app available as well. I didn't jump into that too much for the session today, but everything I covered off in the call is also available on the app on the phone. So it's particularly useful on the invoice module on the approval workflow. So if you've got managers who are out of the office more often than not, they can review and approve or dispute invoices straight from the app on their phone without even needing to come into the office or work at their desk. So absolutely very suited for staff working remotely.
Fantastic. We do have a question here that I mistakenly clicked through, but we do have a client that's currently using ProSpend for corporate cards with an integration into EXO that they're currently downloading and uploading. Now, do you want to talk a little bit about the enhancements to our EXO integration with ProSpend?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not too sure who the client is, but it depends on when you came on board with ProSpend. Obviously, we've got quite a number of clients between on MYB, both at EXO and Advanced with Kilimanjaro. So we're always beefing out and building up the development on those platforms. With MYB EXO, traditionally, it was through a data file. So we had a preset report, which you could then export out of ProSpend and upload that into EXO through the Expense Manager connector. We have recently this year released the API option as well. So if you did want to look at upgrading over to the EXO API option, feel free to reach out either to your ProSpend or Kilimanjaro account manager, and they can take you through the options there to bring you over. The big advantage of that is that that data file goes away. So as you finalize those invoices or company credit cards in your example there in ProSpend, that will then be exported directly. So no need to export that flat file or do the upload. The big advantage is it actually works both ways. So as you create or update things like projects, suppliers, tasks in MYB, EXO, or Advanced, that is all then being reflected back in our system automatically. So definitely reach out so we can look at getting those enhancements to you as well.
Fantastic. Now, is ProSpend customizable? A particular client on the call has customized data on their purchase order. Could that be matched against invoices being received in ProSpend?
Yeah, absolutely. So the system is highly customizable, but it's also very configurable as well. I suppose the difference between the two is that there's so many flags and switches, there's so many standard options that you probably don't need to go down that customization path. But certainly feel free to reach out. We can run through, what information there is on those purchase orders you're running at the moment, and if that's supported as standard.
All right. We've got some questions coming here into the virtual cards. So I might hand this one over to you, Carl. Client wondering here about the fees associated with virtual cards and the security of funds transferred to a bank account.
So the fees are quite straightforward, 0.1% of the transaction and 10 cents per transaction. Our average transaction amount in the platform is around about $286. So 10 cents for that transaction cost, and then the 0.1% on top of that is the costs. And what was the second part of the question?
Security of funds that are being transferred to the treasury account.
So basically, so the funds that are transferred into the treasury account can only be drawn down at this moment from the virtual cards. And the virtual cards, they issue to individual employees into the business, and the individual employee has to provide the mobile telephone number so that you make sure you're putting that virtual card to the right person. And then two-factor authentication comes into it as well to apply that. So that's really the security around the treasury function.
Fantastic. Now, do the virtual card transactions automatically sync into EXO in Advanced?
They don't sync into EXO in Advanced automatically. We capture them into ProSpend. We will scan and code them as best we can. So if it's a taxi charge, it'll probably be able to read that. But like Phil said in his demo, some of the coding to say things like projects or maybe a description on why that expense occurred might have to be added. And obviously the receipt needs to be uploaded. And then obviously once all of that's done and approved, it goes through the same process as what Phil showed in terms of the AP, where you can have finance do a final check to make sure that everything is correct and coded before going into the ERP system.
Of course, this is often talking around the expense management piece. We haven't really done any demonstrations around that today, but of course, there's, as well as the virtual cards, there's the expense management piece where you're actually, entering those receipts, capturing those transactions, the approval process to support that. So there's a fair bit more to talk through. If you are interested in exploring those virtual cards further, please do reach out. Another question here, and I will make that last call for questions. If you've got any final questions, please do just use that Q&A button. As a bank approver of payments, I'm a little anxious about payments being governed by the system. Phil or Carl, any feedback around that one in terms of automatic payment of suppliers, that feature that's coming soon?
So the payment is not going to be automatic. It will go through approval processes, and you will have the checks and balances of who did what. The nice thing is you're moving away from having an ABA file, which can be modified. Some of the stories that I've heard is, people, rather than modifying the bank account information, instead of doing that, they modify the payment amount that they want to make. So they basically overpay their suppliers, and then when the suppliers come back to them, they say, you've overpaid, and then it's an incorrect bank account is being provided to return the money into. So basically all of these loopholes in terms of fraud are being removed. So basically you've got your treasury function within ProSpend. We're capturing the BSB and account number from the ERP system. We're obviously checking that. We're doing the three-way matching. We're approving the payment, and then we're pressing the button to pay to that supplier. So therefore, all that information that we're paying to is obviously reliant on the ERP having that information correct. And I think with MYOB Advanced, if you was to make a change to the supplier bank account information, this alert goes off to the system administrator of MYOB Advanced to say, look, this has changed. So there's quite a lot of checks and balances to make sure that there's no fraudulent activity happening around bank account information. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so, Carl. That's great. Phil, did you have anything else to add?
Not so much apart from what Carl had mentioned there. The benefit of that as well, there will be a full bank approval process as well. So obviously the same checks and balances will still apply. It'll just be enhanced. So rather than working from multiple disparate systems in terms of checking the invoice, finding the PDF, checking the payment, it will all be just brought into the one platform.
Yeah, of course, there's pros and cons. You can choose how to manage that in terms of the payment process. It isn't necessarily an all-in or all-out process in terms of utilizing that payments feature. It is an optional configuration. So certainly explore that with your account manager if you have any further questions. Now, a couple more here. What would you say the maximum number of invoices processed per month would be that suits ProSpend? Do you have clients that have thousands of invoices per month?
Yeah, absolutely. There's
Phil.
I'll jump in, Carl. I'll steal that one. Look, there's absolutely no limit on the number of invoices you can process through the platform. Like Carl mentioned in the slide deck as well, like our clients really range in terms of size and volume. So we've got some smaller clients, they might have, say, 20 or 30 staff with, say, 200-300 invoices a month. We've got larger multinational clients. I think of names like, I suppose, KFC, Best and Less, Weight Watchers globally. And some of those might process, say, 40,000 plus invoices every single month. So our clients really do range in terms of size and volume. So absolutely, if you've got if you have a client with a few thousand invoices a month, the system would certainly be suitable.
And just to maybe expand upon that, Phil, what do you think would be the minimum number of invoices per month where a client would get value out of ProSpend?
Yeah, look, the value of the platform really kicks in once doing about 100, 150 plus invoices per month. That's normally where it starts to become a pain point. Particularly if you're manually keying those invoices into MYB, you're emailing them through for approval. You're then trying to remember where those invoices are at any point in time. So generally speaking, it's once you've got about 150 plus invoices. On the expense management side, it's normally where you've got about 20 or so staff, 20 and above staff, processing either staff out-of-pocket expenses or company credit cards. So that's where the pain point starts to crop up on the expense side.
Yeah. Just to add to that, Stephen, we do have a customer that's processing just over 60 AP a month. And the reason why they're choosing ProSpend is they actually got stung by a fraudulent invoice. I don't remember the amount of that invoice that they got stung by, but basically they say ProSpend pays for itself by not having that opportunity to get stung again.
Yeah, look, I certainly think if you're concerned about those risks of fraud within your organisation, of course, most of us are, because that is becoming significantly increased as time goes on. Or if you're looking at trying to get some efficiencies around those processes, maybe that entry point is a little bit smaller. Now, if ProSpend loads invoices into MYB Advanced, do you expect it to slow down the system? And how do you manage that? Phil?
Look, no. Like from experience, like we have hundreds of clients who run ProSpend alongside MYB Advanced and EXO. For the clients who are posting those bills across into MYB, I mentioned as well, like you've got a couple of options with how you have them going through. So obviously you can have that hyperlink, so that document link which sits up in the header level area. That does not take up any storage within MYB Advanced. It's a clickable hyperlink within MYB. The invoice itself is actually stored within ProSpend. You do have the option to obviously export the PDF invoice itself into MYB as an attachment. Obviously, just be aware that does then start to take up storage within MYB Advanced, but I haven't had any clients experience slowness as a part of that.
Yeah, and to add to that, we're a premium MYOB partner, so we've spent a lot of time working with the development teams at MYOB, and obviously, if there was anything that we needed to do to make the performance better, we obviously work with the MYOB team closely. So there's always lines of communication open with MYOB in terms of upgrades and any other assistance that we need. So if there are any issues, then we'll be working with MYOB to solve those issues.
Very good. Now I've got three more quick ones here, gents. First one, do you foresee that you will interface with Xero as well as Advanced? Let me firstly just add, if you are using Xero in addition to MYOB Advanced, we'd encourage you to think about the multi-company features of Advanced, so you can actually bring those two together. But of course, ProSpend does interface with Xero as well. So that is an option for any of your clients. Anything to add, Phil or Carl?
I think you make a good point there, Stephen, about having it consolidated into MYOB. Your reporting obviously becomes a lot easier. So great advice.
All right, now I've got two more here. Firstly, Phil, our industry will need to recharge the client. In one project, there might be 400 to 500 clients. So we use the projects so using the project to recharge is out of the question. In our MYOB Advanced configuration, we have a customized field called Recharge ID that is allocated to that client. Can we use ProSpend in that environment?
Yes, you absolutely can. This is actually a very common scenario. So we have a lot of clients across a broad range of industries who then on charge either credit card expenses or accounts payable invoices back to a client or to a project. Certainly, if that's the sort of scale that you're running that at, it's not going to be practical to do the split or the allocation in ProSpend directly. So we would instead mirror your MYOB Advanced setup. So if you already have a customized field in MYOB Advanced to track that client ID or recharge ID, we would essentially mirror that in ProSpend itself. You would select the recharge ID. MYOB Advanced will then still do that split or the allocation. So great question there.
Fantastic. And the last one, can we have a more detailed session on three-way matching in another webinar? So look,
absolutely.
we can absolutely look towards that. But let me just suggest, if you do have some questions around that, just reach out, speak to your account manager, and we can arrange more of a one-on-one session to talk through those options. All right, that's it in terms of questions. Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you to all our attendees. Of course, in terms of a bit of a call to action, if you do want to explore ProSpend further and get some advantages around your AP processes, around your expense management processes, please do reach out to your account manager. We can connect you up with both Carl and Phil and provide you a more detailed demo that recognises your business's needs and provides you some opportunities to move forward and get some improvements across your organisation. Thanks again, Carl, and thank you again, Phil.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone, for jumping on.
Have a fantastic day.